Well, first of all, I want to thank Jane in particular and the organizers for inviting me here today. I have two quibbles already with people's presentations. The first was that someone said everyone's an expert, and I am not in anything an expert in anything you all are talking about today. And secondly, I believe Stephen said about the slave wrecks that he would be the biggest outlier, and I think I may be challenging him. So with that introduction, I wanted to somewhat shift gears and talk to you about something that is happening in my world of reproductive technology law, and that I think collides in many ways with your world. And I'm going to give you a very fast flyover, if you will, babies and borders. And so the legal issues in cross-border reproductive tourism, which is a term that I don't accept but is used a lot, is a subject of a course that I teach at Georgetown Law School, so I will summarize that semester in about 11 minutes that I have left. I think the more accurate term is cross-border reproductive care. And what I would say is, what is that? And definitionally, I would say it is travel across borders to get medical assistance to create a family. And I use all of those words rather carefully because it's not always people who travel, and it's not always such a happy baby in the suitcase. This is a graphic I like to use that just says this was an actual case in 2011 where French parents tried to smuggle their twins born in the Ukraine to a Ukrainian surrogate over the border because France did not allow surrogacy. They were caught at the border. These little babies were actually in the floorboards of the father's truck. Things worked out okay, but that's what happens when people are trying to create their families across country lines. So I want to sort of talk very briefly about the what, who, why, where, and when of cross-border reproductive care. It's when you travel outside the country to create a family with the intent to come home and parent in your home country. It's very important because that raises issues around citizenship, immigration, and statelessness. Why are people doing this? There are all kinds of treatments. The one we know most is surrogacy. It gets the biggest headlines. But people travel for just in vitro fertilization. They travel for something called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. That's where you take a single cell out of an IVF embryo and test it to see whether or not it's male, female, carries a genetic mutation, or has a reason why it's not going to be a healthy baby. Allowed in some countries, not in others. It is a fancy way to do sex selection, allowed in the US, not in Australia. We have Australians coming here to do it. Donor gametes. Turkey is a country that has a lot that does not allow donor gametes, nor does Iran, and yet Iran has cutting-edge ART treatment. People are leaving those countries to obtain care they can't get elsewhere. Who's traveling? Mostly the intended parents. Also, however, people are shipping women who are gamete donors, egg donors, to another country. Surrogates are traveling for implantation and then coming back. And then the gametes and embryos are actually being shipped in cryotanks all around the world. So ART goes global. ART meaning the Assisted Reproductive Technologies. The HFEA is the Human Fertilization Embryology Act in the UK. The UK has one of the most regulated systems of assisted reproductive technology in the world. And in 2010, they said that reproductive tourism is the most pressing and challenging new development in the arts. The World Bank in 2010 predicted that Indian surrogacy would rise to a $2.5 billion industry by 2020. There are a lot of scholars starting to pay attention to this field. One of the very interesting terms I've heard most recently is it's not reproductive tourism, it's reproductive exile. So unlike what Don just described about how it's great to collect places to go, I would say, as I thought about that, there isn't a patient that I know, an intended parent, who wouldn't rather stay home and have a baby in bed and in their bedroom in the privacy of their home. These are people who are traveling out of necessity, not out of the idea of collecting interesting experiences. This is one of the graphics that people see a lot. These are Indian women who have agreed to be surrogates. It is a booming industry in India. There have been some attempts to take the regulations and change them. They're 2010 regulations, they're called. They've yet to be passed from anything I can find. They will, in fact, curtail the industry to some degree because they're going to require you be legally married in your home country. We'll get to that in a minute, but that means that gay couples who are routinely going to India are not able to do that anymore. But it is, in fact, a large business, and these are women who are sharing a group home as they are surrogates. So when someone said, is this a gender issue when we talk about tourism, I would say it definitely is when we start talking about surrogates, women who are carrying children for other people. Why do people travel for cross-border reproductive care? Unlike the slide you saw a few minutes ago, there are four main categories of what we consider to be the drivers of this. The first are legal and religious prohibitions. Catholic countries are very, very strict on some of these issues. Secondly is resource considerations. It takes too long. In the UK, we got lots of things, but it takes a long time to access them. Sometimes it costs too much money. Quality. People are traveling to get better care. Safety concerns. Their own country may have an IVF clinic, may not be any good. And finally, personal preferences, which a little bit resonated with me with the diaspora talk. Because there are people who will go back to their home countries in part because they would like an egg donor or a sperm donor who matches their ethnicity. Also, they think they may be able to get more privacy. So here is the briefest of flyovers I have probably ever done. Examples of who's doing what. Same-sex couples started in India. India's new regulations still not quite in effect, forced gay men to go to Thailand. Thailand had a crackdown after baby Gammy. I don't know how many of you remember the woman who had twins, and the couple from Australia said, you know what, we'll take the healthy one, but the one with Down syndrome, we'll say, thank you very much, we'll just leave him here with you. Thailand started paying attention, and the bulge went on to Nepal. I have a slide to show you about what happened after the earthquake in Nepal. Muslim women in Italy cannot get gamete donation. They literally stand at the airport in their burqas, they see their IVF doctor, this is a true vignette, and say, nice to see you, we're all on our way over to Cyprus to get donor eggs, see you later when we get pregnant. International couples are coming here to the US. Why? Because surrogacy is legal. In most states, it's very, I won't say most, in many states it is accessible. It may in fact be less expensive. On the other hand, we have Americans going to India because it is much, much less expensive. The cost of surrogacy in India, if everything goes well, which is a big if, is about 1/3 of the cost here in the US. I had somebody, I gave a presentation with a couple say, there's so much less red tape. And I was like, excuse me, but red tape are actually legal protections, and you shouldn't be so wanting to have them disappear. Quick example, this is donor egg. People don't usually think about reproductive tourism cross-border in terms of non-human beings as opposed to their gametes. Canadians are coming to the US because you can't pay. Eggs are going to Canada because you can't buy them. So we got a cross-border going on right here, just in eggs. It's been described as a market. Lisa Ikamoto is one of my colleagues. She's at UC Davis, and she says this is a phenomenon with moving parts. The reality is interactive. Everything shifts as these pressures happen, and that's what we're going to see. The market realigns, expands, or contract. I want to give you one sobering thought, which is whether or not there's also a very real dimension of sex trafficking and exploitation in this field. And informed consent around the globe, in India, many of these surrogates are illiterate and they're signing with thumbprints. In India, they're often getting their annual salary of their family. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I've debated that for a semester. I'm not going to expect to debate it here in 12 seconds. But they're living in group homes away from their families because they'd be stigmatized to live there because they're getting excellent medical care. We talk about people traveling for medical tourism. The care usually for surrogates in India is very high. One other thing that happened in Thailand is they found a group of Vietnamese women who were actually put into a group home with barbed wire around it, told they couldn't leave until they had their babies. There's a Vice show going around in which a reporter went to India trying to understand what was going on, and the person in charge said, we have an extra baby here, would you like it? We have a couple and they just wanted one and we put 2 in, and so this is extra. And the woman was so appalled, she's looking at them like, what are you talking about? She was mistaken for thinking she was thinking about it. So they said, well, if you want to take it back to your hotel tonight and try it out, that's okay. You can do that. So this is a very busy slide. Basically what I wanted to do was make sure that I keyed you into the participants and their vulnerabilities. The gestational carriers, the surrogates, they're vulnerable for all the reasons that we hear about in the media. The child is vulnerable for things that we can't talk about here today, but citizenship and statelessness are huge issues because every country has their own rules. And so you come here, you're an anchor baby, you're a US citizen. You may not be able to get back into your own country, however. And the intended parents always have to worry about, are we parents and are these our kids? This is the slide I promised you when the earthquake hit in Nepal. I don't know how many of you remember, but there was a huge public relations outcry because it turned out there was an entire group of Israeli gay male who were using surrogates there, and the surrogates were stuck. And they sent a plane in from Israel to get their babies, and they left the surrogates. They came back after the bad PR, and they also took out the very highly pregnant women. And what spooked me about this was, this is a gay couple who had 3 babies born to surrogate mothers in Nepal after they got the babies back to Israel. So for those of us in the field, the wheels start going, wait a minute, why 3 babies? How many embryos were implanted and how many women were there? You know, it's just, there's many, many questions that come up from that. So I want to just leave you, there's more, many, many legal cases we talk about, their rights of the child as to parentage. The problem, I think, is both multifaceted and difficult, and I'll just say to you that there is the Hague Conference on International Law is looking at this picture. They've been looking at this picture for 5 years. They've tried to come up with an international framework. Consensus is hugely elusive. It is hard, if not impossible, to harmonize because countries have different values. and they aren't going to concede their values. The most I think we may be able to hope for is a framework that some countries join that others don't. And by not joining them, then perhaps a couple will say, I'm not going to that country because they exploit surrogates too much. They give them too little money. The medical care is not good enough. We don't really know where this is going. It's been under study for a long time. It's a bit more of a sobering thing than you all are talking about in some of your others. And I would just say thank you very much for inviting me to join you here today.